I think what we were really hoping to do is use this to open up a conversation with the students leading the campaign here. So if you would like to come up and join us, then we'd appreciate being in dialogue with you.
Yeah. No, as in like actually come up. Yeah. Come guys. Yeah, like I know that a lot of people, I mean, I have questions, obviously, right? Like, I always have questions. But like, just to start off, because I know that Yasmin had a question earlier. She's one of the Decolonise QM students, who's doing like amazing work. I'm not gonna talk too much about that, I don't want to embarrass you. And so one of the questions is like, how do you bring other people involved, right? Like, how did you guys make other people, like make your fellow students then participate, or how did you work around them if they were potentially hostile? How did you do that? And also just quickly before, because you know you mentioned that like the work that the flag girl was something that has been done, like that came from work that you've done like 3-4 years ago. And I mean, Remi and I started working together when we set up like a critical race and ethnicities network, right? And the book really came out of, you know, both of us kind of, well, not both, like all of us kind of sitting down after Brexit referendum and just being like, something needs to be said. This is no to all of this. So, you know, all of you guys are making moves right now, and all of that is going to be felt for like such a long time afterwards. So I don't know, yeah, just kind of throwing that out there, just as a thing, and then asking you to take it away. Do things.
I think if I can
hello everyone, my name is Evangeline. I'm actually from the Medway campus, so I'm sure a lot of you haven't actually seen me. So basically at the Medway campus, what we were doing was basically called the Diversity Mark Project. And what I basically had to do, it kind of came in stages. So the first stage was to actually audit the reader list. Obviously that was just to create something tangible to show for face value that there is actually such disproportion in terms of ethnicities and the scholars in which we are being taught. And then the second stage was to conduct student focus groups. And with that, we did actually find it quite difficult to recruit students. We found the most effective ways was to actually go to them face to face and talk to them directly, because it kind of gave a little bit more of a personable feel. There was also like a kind of consensus among the students that that they couldn't make any change. They were almost not surprised, but they were even shocked that there was anything like this happening. There was kind of a sentiment of, oh, well, it's never going to change anyway. So I think definitely getting student voices was very insightful, and as well as us as students talking to other students, it kind of makes it a little bit more relatable. So yeah, and also there was points earlier about how to feed it into the curriculum and stuff like that. For when we were conducting the focus groups, we did create, there was basically pictures. So at the top, it had about 5 known scholars. So I do social sciences, so it had the Marx, the, yeah, you know, the typical ones. And then below it, it had like maybe double that, but in terms of black scholars. And everybody could name the ones along the top, but nobody could actually name the ones at the bottom. And for me, myself too, I'm a last year student, neither could I, or I could name just a few. So that kind of was a strong testament to show, I don't know, maybe when lectures are going on, maybe put the picture on the slide or whatever. So yeah, that was
just quickly. Thank you. So I just completely empathise and hear that from growing up, and when you do enter these spaces where you ask, do you know who these famous black people are? And I used to feel embarrassed that it was a failure on my part, but I've been miseducated. I've been to school in Britain, I've not been, there's been no space for me to recognise those people that we should be holding up as people to look up to. Also interested in the reactions you got from students, and I think that's something that I'm conscious of and that we've spoken about, and it's this: how do we generate hope when we're talking about things that are so fatal, so demoralizing? But I think what we've seen today from this campaign, and what I hope comes through in our book as well, is that we have to have this sense of hope, and there are so many people out there that should give us hope, and you are among them. Definitely, I felt really, really genuinely inspired today. As I've said to a few people, in ways that I have not felt at events in universities for quite a long time. So, thank you.
Thank you for saying that, first of all. One of the things that I find about this project, nothing that has been said explicitly, but there's something to be said about a project that is started with the very deliberate purpose of catering to a certain group of students, right? So we do have other groups or other organizations within the university that are trying to do this, but it just falls right at the back and becomes almost a burden because it's not at the top of their list, or it's not the purpose for which that organization was developed. So being part of Decolonize the curriculum and being able to say to students, I'm literally coming to speak to you to find out what you want to see, how you have been marginalized, what your experience has been, because my sole job is to try and tackle that issue. There's nothing else that I have to work towards. And I found that to be something that was so powerful, not only when I was speaking to others, but in my mindset, in my thought as well. And some people ask me if, or have asked me if having the hub or Decolonize the curriculum is not causing more of a schism between, like, amongst the work that the University of Kent as a whole is trying to do, right? But I don't think so. I think that, as I say in my thing, that it is a principal space, but it's created to cater for a marginalized group, or predominantly students of color, at first instance. That is who has been excluded and who we're looking to cater for at first, and then work towards like spreading our influence across the rest of the university.
Brilliant. One of the things I didn't mention at the beginning is this idea that this space is a critical space. So the views that are expressed here, we would want to respect these views, but also give the participants an opportunity to represent their own views. So that's something I need to reiterate. In saying that, I think I would want to hear some perspectives from Wahida, without putting me on the spot. I think that would be a very important intervention in this conversation, right? And we've had these discussions, right? But before we do that, we'll preface that with the perspectives of a second-year law student who, because she was in the second year, she wasn't eligible to become a focus group leader, right? Through no fault of hers, but she's still been integral with this project and has contributed through the podcast. So I want to hear the perspectives initially from Beatrice, and then Wahida.
Sorry, just to confirm, what was the question?
So Beatrice was one of the first students that sort of interacted with the whole agenda. And I just want to hear your perspective, what motivated you to get involved, and to get involved to the point where we're speaking on podcasts about stripping the white wall, right? So we want to hear those perspectives.
Okay, cool. Hi guys, my name's Beatrice. Thanks, hi. What made me want to join this movement? I think it was a shock to me. I think coming from first year, I remember Akala came, and he was talking about a lot of people in history Like, I thought I kind of knew the basics of history. I didn't know there was a massive gap in my knowledge, that there were so many other people of colour that had been part of history that I just didn't know about, because the history I learned from school was this glorified of history of just British people, essentially, that I didn't feel connected to. And then knowing that there were people who were British and of my skin colour and male and female that I could connect to was really shocking for me, because I felt cheated. That's how I felt. I felt that someone had told me, that given me partial knowledge, and I thought that was really unfair. And I wanted someone to fill that gap. I needed that gap to be filled. And then I remember at the beginning of second year, Grace Ononiri came, but this was at a law event. And again, another black woman who was also in the field of law that I could relate to. I was like, so there are people in this country that I can actually relate to on an intellectual level. I said, okay. So when this Suhraiya came and she told me, this was after the event about something she wanted to do called Decolonise the curriculum, I thought this was so needed. Because there are people who have a certain perspective that I could also relate to. Because I think the biggest thing for me was reading about people like, for example, John Stuart Mill and Kant and Keane, and having their perspective in your mind, but seeing it from a different point of view, from like a black female or a Muslim female or Muslim male, like just changes your perspective and how you critically understand something, and you're actually able to break something down. So for me, that was really essential, because I didn't want my perspective to be a white male. I actually wanted my perspective to be my perspective, and I wanted people of my colour to influence what I was writing. So that's why I wanted to do something for me, and the podcast was something I could do because I like talking, and also it was something quite fun, it was just fun for me to do. So I thought that was the way I could participate in it, and that's why I decided to join, really.
Thank you very much. There's something there around pedagogy, about how we disseminate knowledge. There's no one size fit all, right? Podcasts, could we use those mediums to disseminate knowledge? Before Wahida speaks, do you want to add something?
Just quickly before I leave. So I was just like, there was definitely a spot putting. Like, you'll be fine. You'll be great. No, just because there's been a lot of like kind of comments about, like I felt cheated, and you're right to feel cheated, right? Like you're right to feel, angry at the institutions that claim that they're giving you this like education that turns out to be incredibly colonial. And so we gotta say what it is, like just speak the truth. But at the same time, there are all of this other kind of knowledges that we've been developing anyway outside of these academic spaces, especially because I think about like the role of like the black feminists and also like post-colonial feminists have taken in like redefining what we think about as knowledge, right? So then we need to think about, well, what other spaces have black women and women of color more generally existed in and produced knowledge from? So you have to think about kitchens, right? You have to think about like hairdressers. You have to think about like mosques. You have to think about prayer circles. You have to think about the church. You have to think about all of these other spaces where we're actually having these conversations and finding ways to support one another. And I think that's a really important way, just because, yes, there's all this emphasis on like, okay, yeah, I need to read the right things. I want to read more. I want to like look at all these other things. But also you need to know that you have so much knowledge already. You have that knowledge in you anyway. And that knowledge is something that you should be able to like develop further. It needs to be critical. You need to be supported by different people to help you develop that. But there is already so much knowledge there. So that's kind of what I want to say.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm really glad you just mentioned that. Just during the break, me, Suhaiymah, and another student who's come from UCL, we just went into the mosque to quickly pray. And they were having sister circle. There was just something, I saw Qurans and brothers were having brother circle on the brother's side. And talking about these spaces that we've created so that we feel comfortable to talk is something that is unfortunately confined to that space. I didn't realise it was going to be so difficult to actually get people to participate in the focus groups, even though I held 2. And it was surprisingly not many people turned up, even though during these sister circles, brother circles, or any other get-togethers, they're very happy to talk. And the reason being was there was this whole fear of being under surveillance. You know, is my degree going to be on the line and whatnot? So I had a lot of private conversations, so I was still able to get their views. It's this idea of belonging, but only belonging to a certain confined space that we've had to create ourselves is not fair. We should be able to, you know, sit on places like this, have get-togethers like this with people from all kinds of communities and be able to share our experiences. I don't think I answered your question. What was your question?
Perfect. That is the answer.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
No, thank you very much for that disclosure.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering about the involvement of male students in the focus groups. Before we get to Ahmed, but the male students, because I think it's quite important when we look at marginalized groups within marginalized groups. And so, you know, in my experience in this university, it's very easy to get the perspectives of female students.
Yeah.
But male students generally.
I think you're right, and I think with the rise of the ideology of feminism, I don't think we should then silence the voice of the male. I don't think that's what we're trying to achieve through, or anyone should be trying to achieve through feminism. The demand should be equality, but not superiority in the sense of, you know, like a power play where I'm above you kind of thing.
Yeah, sorry, can I just just on that point. Just before, because you wanted to talk about like your experience.
because I conducted the male focus group for the brothers.
Okay, yeah.
So that's why I just wanted to add on, kind of echo on some stuff that Wade.
Can I just quickly, and then like thank you. So yeah, I think it's really important for us to think about like people who are structurally disadvantaged, right? And so within that, I guess I'm thinking about like specifically what it means for us to have these like anti-racist spaces and not talk about trans or disabled issues, right? But there's also a way in which like there is a problem maybe. I'm willing to say that there is a problem in terms of engaging like male students in these conversations, but are they structurally disadvantaged in the same kinds of ways in which like female students are disadvantaged, or even trans students are disadvantaged, or able-bodied students are disadvantaged? I would argue no. Because there's no way in which we can talk about a culture of misogyny. There's no way in which we can talk about a culture of like transphobia, of a culture of like white supremacy, right? All of these things as intersecting, right? And so then when we talk about, okay, well, yes, it's great that women are here, but we need to have more men, what does it mean then like that we're almost saying that it's not that the women are overtaking the men, as opposed to the fact that there are just so many women who have always been involved in the work, right? And the fact that if we think about figures like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and also some current figures who are out there in the public sphere, often behind them doing the labor, again, are Black women. Not only Black women, but women of color, actually. So there's something really powerful about seeing so many of you here, but it also kind of reminds me that a lot of the people who are often doing the labor behind the scenes are women of color. Which is something that I just wanted to kind of add. Then I'll give the.
Absolutely.
Can I just?
No, absolutely. I think what we see is, particularly in this university, help seeking. So I look at these discussions as a way of providing that support, psychological support, because it's an issue that is faced by both male and female. So not in the sense of a power structure, as in wanting to see male students represented, but also with the view that our services aren't being accessed by some students. And it's very important to get a diverse range of perspectives. So I would suspect that a lot of male students would almost be operating under the legacy of, if they want us to interview us, it might be similar to when the police calls us for an interview. So you summon a student for an interview, and all of a sudden there's suspicion, right? And Ahmed will speak about his challenges canvassing the views of the male students as well. So when I speak about gender in that relation, it is not within power structures. It's about representing the voices
Yeah.
in general.
But gender is power structures, right? And also like, no, real talk. Gender is power structures. And also like, I mean, yes, like male students are concerned with like policing and surveillance, but female students are concerned with policing and surveillance.
Absolutely.
So I mean, these are issues that we need to be thinking about across like gender bias. So I'm just saying that like, if we're gonna talk about people who are like if we actually want to think about decolonization, if we actually want to think about who we want to censor in our politics, it needs to start with the people who are most structurally disadvantaged.
Absolutely.
And within that, I mean, even male-female doesn't really get at the people who are mostly structurally disadvantaged within these systems. So what does it mean to start with trans people, right? What does it mean to start with non-binary people of color and work from there, for whatever we do next? I think that's just what I wanted to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very cool.
Right, so I just wanted to speak more on the idea of trust. And what we got was initially a surprise because one of my focus groups was in the mosque, because I recognized that that's where the brothers kind of hang out and have their own kind of space of comfort and speak to each other. And the one thing that came out when I sat down with my focus group leader, we had to go through the kind of, that they knew us personally. So that was the thing, because they knew us personally, we could kind of reach out to our networks of people that we knew. I sent out, and with my focus group leader, we did send out an open invitation to people, kind of Muslim students here at the University of Kent. But most of the people that we actually got were from word of mouth. It's just we had to kind of reach out through our networks of those people, because then the idea was trust, and we asked them, would you have said yes to this? And this was the thing that kind of was mentioned in the manifesto as well. Would you have agreed to even meet or even speak? They were like, no, absolutely not. Even if we did speak, it would be filtered, because we can say to you guys things and know that you will understand us. We don't have to explain ourselves. We don't have to be afraid that you will misunderstand us. And so that idea of trust was central, I think, to conducting the interviews. Yeah.
No.
I just wanted to add to this as well. So obviously Fly, like I said, it was just organising space for women and non-binary people of colour, but I have to say that the strongest opponents we found to the work we did on campus were straight cis men of colour. And I say that because actually it's not to say, to me it's never a coincidence or a surprise that you see women of colour predominantly doing the work. Whether on our campus that was Decolonising, that was anti-racism, that was feminism, that was divestment from the arms trade, divestment from fossil fuels. It was every single facet of campus activism. And it's not a surprise because I think, and the men you did see were generally queer. I think that's important to recognise as well, because the thing that we saw, we did a big intervention where we had Fly host men of colour. So men of colour come, we chat. And we said, what we found was that the way that you are gendered as a man of colour in a space like a university is that, of course, it's a racialised fetishization, but it's a fetishization that you can benefit from if you go, I'm seen as cool, and I can go with that. And what we found is that a lot of the men that we were talking to were able to survive in that way. That was their way of surviving. And I'm not saying it was easy or fun or good, but I think that women of colour found themselves much more often in a place where there was no benefit. There was no benefit to the fetishization and the racialization you face. So I think it is really important to acknowledge and remember that it's, and to also remember that these conversations we're having right now are not tangential at all to this conversation. This is central to this conversation. But also in the conversation about just like kind of getting people active, I think it's also that a lot of times you're exposing and disrupting the kind of survival that people are trying to do. And I think the reason that we found that straight men of colour were particularly opposed to what we were doing often was that we were exposing them as racialized subjects within the institution. And it was like, if it wasn't for that, they would have been able to kind of just, head down. And one guy said that, he was like, I just want to put my head down and get through it. And I get that, but that's not possible for everybody to do. And so I just want to say that, and also to say that on the other hand, just going, I guess, to what Azeezat was saying about that maybe there are different forms of knowledge and different ways of decolonizing. And I just think of my housemate at the moment who's at university, and she's a primary carer for her parents, and there's no way that she has the time to go around decolonizing the institution, right? But actually, the work that she is doing is the work. You know, when we talk about the work, like that's the work. And so I think also not having a presumption about lack of like getting involved with these projects as being kind of apathy, but also being like that we're the ones in a privileged position to be so involved in a sense. So I think maybe just like disrupting our own understanding of that. And the final thing was just that a lot of students always would say like, you know, I paid for this, so I'm gonna, you know, make the most of it. And I think that neoliberalizing understanding of ourselves and our interaction with university is really harmful. And I've seen that so much where it then becomes a coercive tool to, you know, you cannot dissent because you paid for this experience. And so I think remembering the place of that and not losing sight of capitalism in all of this as well, right? Because I think that's one of the most, like, in the process of democratizing and decolonizing the university, we really need to make it free for everybody. And that's what liberating it will also entail. So yeah, I just wanted to add those thoughts.
Oh, sorry. Remi,
Yeah.
Oh no, so I know that you've had a for a while.
So basically, my question is actually on colonization and discussion, like you have, because I'm doing anthropology. Right now, there's not many people of color at all. Most of them are white, even if they're from all around the European state. And I find a lot of the time, whenever colonization comes up, I'm the only one, since I've been in Trinidad, I'm the only one who's even experienced colonization from outside the homeland. And I've always found it interesting to see how they see colonization, but I find they have no idea what it's like outside. No matter whether you're someone of color or someone who's white, if you've always grown up here, you see something very different. And the whole idea of developing countries and third world countries, when you actually live there, you kind of don't see it the same. So what I would ask is kind of what can you do when people are still marginal to kind of influence this kind of other view of colonization, because still the majority of people are the people who are from here.
No, yeah.
Hi, thank you for your question, actually. And I think it's a really interesting question. So I'm an international student, so I inhabit a really strange space that was been here for 5 years, so, you know enough about Britain to be able to assimilate into British spaces, but still international because of the virtue of my passport. And I think the best thing that helps about, translating the idea of colonialism and colonization and the kind of violence that comes from it is banging on about it, actually, and just annoying the hell out of your white peers, to being like, no, this is a thing which is happening. So I remember that I was having a conversation with a friend of mine regarding my tuition fees, because I pay ridiculous amounts of tuition for being over here, and just how the process of dehumanization begins with our applying for the visa and all of these things, and just having those conversations and contextualizing it around the ideas of immigration and border control and where it stems from, and the whole colonial idea of controlling one's borders and the favored and the unfavored. I don't think they were expecting that, but they kind of got more of an insight into the pressures that international students, especially international students who are also women, deal with in that kind of sense. Because as someone who is disabled but is also a woman, is also a woman of color, it's a whole other journey when you're also an international student, because you've got to manage the finances, you've got to apply for all sorts of visas, you've got to manage your documentation, you've got to make it to class. You're having a panic attack, but you can't go to class, but they're going to put that down to the Home Office saying that, oh, she's missed classes, so you're going to take immigration away. It's also the precarious spaces that we inhabit, and I don't think that experience translates for a lot of people. So the only way to translate it is to keep talking about it and keep banging on about it. Just like, no, this is happening, you need to notice it, you need to do something about it.
Okay, what I was going to say is that the question is kind of just something I wanted to share, which is I understand what you're saying about gender, etc. But my experience of working in educational institutions is that actually, I personally think, and this is working not just in this university but in secondary school in Gloucester County, I think it's black males who face most challenges from what I've seen. I think there's a culture of toxic masculinity. I can totally understand why black males want to keep their heads down, because I'm just talking socially, and I've been to 2 different universities myself. And I've seen and spoken to numerous teachers, and in my perception is that black males are treated differently and they are oppressed in a way that I think goes beyond the way women are oppressed. That's my personal experience. I just wanted to share that because I think it's very easy for us to say, to make comments about gender and sort of say it's not so difficult for men, but I think in the case of black males, I really feel that it is.
Can I respond to that? Sure. Okay, so my name's Anthony. I had a focus group full of black males. There's about 12 of us. And I didn't really face the issue of finding difficulty recruiting them, to be honest with you. And that was because I feel like you just need to know how to go about it. And what I did is you just tap into the emotion within them. And the reason why I got involved in this project is because something that I'm really passionate about. And I despise being lumped into any sort of category in which I do not belong, whether that's in terms of the BAME attainment gap, being academically inferior, or even coming from the stereotype that we come from low-income households or that we're involved with gangs. Any of those categories, I get a bit annoyed. And so I thought, you know what, that is because I'm black. And so a lot of other black boys should feel this too. And so if you tap into that, then it's quite easy to recruit them in that sense. The only sort of hesitation or reluctance I was met with is because we're just so busy. That was the only problem that we came across. So for me, for example, in 2 weeks' time, I have 4 deadlines. I'm involved with 4 projects, not including this one. I've got about 3 other conferences to do. And so it is just a very, very busy time for us. And that's why some people are reluctant to jump on the project. But for me, in terms of that, I think the two best quotes I always have in the back of my mind is, one, is that you can't complain about there being too much on your plate when the goal was to eat. I love that one. And number 2 was that pressure makes diamonds. So, and I feel like if you just have those in the back of your head, I feel like it helps you get through it really.
Thank you. So, a couple of things happened. So first, I'm gonna respond to the point around international not even international students, but thinking more globally, right? Which is what we should all be doing anyway. Because I think that was something that we were really conscious of when we were writing or putting together the collection and working with different authors, Jason being here amongst them. And it was really important for us to think beyond the West specifically. But also for me personally, I remember having a conversation with my aunt after the Brexit referendum, and I was just like, man, they just do not care about us. And she was just like, but have they ever? Have you been seeing what has been happening around the world? And if you could ignore that, but Brexit was the end for you. That tells you something about where your priorities have lied, right? So I think that's something that I guess yes, absolutely, you guys should, bang on about it, but also take care of yourselves and walk away if you can. They do not deserve your labor, so you can leave, that's totally fine. But more importantly, I also think that it's up to us as people of color who grew up here, who grew up in the West, to also bang on about our brothers and sisters and non-binary siblings who are outside of the West, right? Think some more about what does it mean to actually be in solidarity with them? What does it mean to actually think about the borders that Britain is involved in? What does it mean to be complicit in the borders that Britain is involved in? So that's kind of that's that one point. You wanted to.
Oh no, well, finish your point now.
No, go for it.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say that I find that incredibly important as well. But in the fact of people who do grow up in the West, I'm interested in it. It's the fact that it's not shown through the curriculum. It's not taught to them. So when I came here, a lot of people were ignorant about certain things about Trinidad. People ask, "Oh, did you come by plane?" Not 2 months to come by boat, but yeah. So the fact of the matter is that this is why decolonizing the curriculum is so important, because colonialism is still alive in different forms, I think. And it's important for, again, these different perspectives to be shown internationally and global perspectives, where we can see that what is beneficial to developed countries or to Britain or the UK is not beneficial to some of the developing countries. The whole idea of free market, trade liberalization. And they use these like words, and then it's like, oh, but has any of the developing countries benefited from this free market? No. So it's just that fact of like, it's why the curriculum needs to be decolonized, so other people can understand that the matter is crazy.
Yeah, I remember I was doing a Black Panther screening. One of my main questions was, hey, what does it mean that like we even have the CIA in this? Visually stunning, love it visually. But what does it mean to still have the CIA in Africa? Why would we do that? And I remember like one of the students was like this white student was like, yeah, and colonization was bad, but it opened up the possibility of trade. And I was just like, there was no trade, it was just theft. It was just murder and theft, right? So what does that say about our understanding of of these histories when it's like set up as the railways, set up as the, as opposed to like a deeply dehumanizing system.
I was just going to add to the whole thing. So I remember in my first year, I had a conversation with a white friend of mine, and we were just, conversing about colonialism, and I was just going at it, just being like, this is bad, etc., etc. And he was just like, well, without us, you would have to swim to the UK because you won't have planes. I was just like, this conversation's over now, and I don't know you anymore, but that's the kind of experiences which international students especially have to deal with in their first year, where people think, oh, you speak really good English or something like that. Of course I speak good English. You ruled us for 200 goddamn years. All our education is Eurocentric. Like, what do you expect?
And at some extent, you can't really blame them for their ignorance, but to the same extent, it's like it needs to not continue.
Yeah. But also, like, you can blame them for their ignorance.
To some extent,
No, I'm cool with responsibility.
Because basically, my boyfriend is half Trinidadian and half Jamaican, like he grew up here, and I find that like his parents didn't make sure that he had this black education kind of thing, but he's still quite ignorant and very Eurocentric in certain regards, especially since I'm doing anthropology, so I'm learning about other ways of living. So even though he's not meaning to, he still has that ignorance, and he has tried to get rid of it. But it's kind of like Europe kind of feels, and America feels like they're the center of the world, and they don't realize that they're not one, or how they kind of influence everyone else. Like the whole Windrush thing is hilarious because they're like, why are all these people in our country? Because you told them to come.
Yeah, I think going back to your original question, I think we really have to value collectives. So collectives around decolonisation should include students from the Global South. It shouldn't just be racially minoritized students from Britain. I think a caveat to that is within our collectives we have to value dialogue, and we have to think about power hierarchies within our collectives. So we have to think about whose voices get censored, and I think a challenge for collectives like this is making sure that voices from the Global South get time and space to speak, and there is active listening and an attempt to understand, even if the students from the Global South might be considerably outnumbered in terms of the collective. And going back to a couple of threads, thinking of this idea about education existing outside of the academy, that is something that I've taken a lot from Azeezat's work. I want to think about that on one hand and think about this idea of distrust in terms of getting groups of students together for this project. I wonder if a form of black or people of colour intellect or knowledge can be found in distrust. So if we think about why are black and brown students distrusting of the university, why do black and brown people not trust the police? And the deeper we look, we might see that black and brown people are very right not to trust the police because of the way the police have treated black and brown communities for centuries, because of the roots that contemporary policing are tied to. Yeah. So I wonder if we can think about distrust as not just something negative, but something that shows experiential knowledge and something that is incredibly important in terms of survival.
Just on that point, and I'm so happy, like this is happening, I'm really happy. On the other hand, now it's towards the end of the day, I'm shitting myself because I know that when I go back to work tomorrow or Friday, and Dave and I have got meetings with various people, and actually there's so much distrust. And actually the only thing that keeps me going is the fact that I know Dave's got my back, and Sheree's got my back, and there's other people that have got our back, and that this lot here, and the fact that you look so super cool in those hoodies.
You look super cool in those hoodies. Yeah, I know. I'm jealous all day.
Yeah. Help me.
Can I say something before the send vote? So we've got an evaluation questionnaire because we want to basically find out how we can maybe make this even better, and also want to find out how much you got from this or didn't get from this. So you'll get an email tomorrow from me. It's a portrait, so it'll just take a couple of minutes. It'd be really grateful if you could just give us your honest feedback. It's questions about how much you learned or gained, etc. Please do take part. Thank you very much.
Yeah, can I just I mean, does anyone actually before this all you go for it.
So I think this is something that among some people from the committee, from students, that we were having conversation as we were coming closer to the conference. And it's something that I think Professor Karen hinted on, is the idea that yes, it's great, everybody comes together, there is this kind of big moment. What happens after? And the thing is, that's a conversation that some people from the committee have been having, is this anxiety of, this feels like our baby. This feels like, we've put in so much work in this. Amongst everything else, all the study, I'm a PhD student and I'm teaching as well, amongst all those things, how do we move forward? How do we sustain this? How do we keep the momentum? And that's a massive kind of question mark over our heads. And we'd love to get anybody's opinion, and obviously all of you are so much more experienced than all of us, so.
Really important question, and that segues on nicely from the 3-year student cycle that we mentioned earlier. Before we get to one of the experts, I'd just like to say, as students, one of the things I'd like to draw to your attention is the fact that, as Azeezat said earlier, knowledge is created in different spaces. So you have the knowledge. So in your writings, you're all doing essays, dissertations. You can sustain this conversation through your writing and stand on the shoulders of giants, right? You reference these giants, and you develop the conversations there.
And you are giants in yourself, like you are the experts.
Yeah. So the conversations can be sustained in the writings, and also an event like this, it's groundbreaking in this institution. But you need to be, obviously we made the recommendation previously, but you need to be mentioning to the university that, look, this could be an annual event where we have a public forum where students can come together, disseminate knowledge, because students are experts at being students. So never discredit that fact that you are all here as repositories of knowledge as well, right? So can we invite Jason to hear his comments on this?
Thanks very much, appreciate it. Sorry, I just wanted to reiterate again, you lot really are unbelievable. As a collective, you're unbelievable. Anthony, up until today I thought East weren't bringing anything, but now I know East London are doing something special, because I'm from South. So yeah, you did great stuff. Honestly, what you said today really stuck with me in a big way, and Sheree, Suhraiya and Dave, you're doing unbelievable work. in the sector, generally speaking, I kind of spoke about this idea that what you're doing is not just institutional leading, it's sector leading. And you spoke, Remi spoke about how do you sustain the work. It's not a suggestion about how you sustain it, but I do think that this could be a blueprint for other models of activism in other universities, because I don't know how it happens. Well, we know how it happens, but a lot of them lose momentum and traction. And there's something about this particular movement that I just think is going to be around for a long time. I just want to know that what would you suggest to other universities in terms of having a movement like this? Because obviously, you know, they don't have the privilege maybe of having, you know, Dave's, you know, Sheree and Suhraiya's all over the place, but it is fundamentally a student movement that's been activated, and I just want to know what your suggestions might be for other institutions, because I think what you have is an unbelievable, quite powerful model, and in my 7 years working in academia, I've never seen anything like it, and I've worked in 5 institutions, so it's pretty powerful.
Remi and
I just in terms of, I know that, you know, that question was directed to the students, so if any of the students want to answer, okay, cool.
It's a really small comment, but it's just that engaging with first years and second years, I think is really important, because there's a lot of third years here. And I'm a first year student, and I know that I'm definitely going to try and get involved further and further along. And I think it's just going back to Anthony's point of you need to engage people in the first week and at the first stages so they continue to be interested. So I think this is a long project, so I think that's one way that we can do it.
I think another way of, you know, getting it to other universities would be through informal, you know, knowledge and informal networks that we've been discussing all day. Talk to your friends. Tell them this is happening. Get them, you know, into it. Just be like, this is something that we're doing. It seems pretty rad. You should try it out. Something like that, because, like, you know, it's happening here. I think Oxford was trying to do something similar, but it does happen that it gets co-opted, or, you know, people lose interest or whatever happens. But if there are those few people who are still interested and you can keep the conversation going, I think you kind of attract more people into it, and they want to keep doing it, you know, doing the activism, doing the work with you. And, you know, in terms of praxis, within the university as well, start teaching more about, you know, people of color, women of color, put them in your curriculum. I know we talk a lot about decolonizing the curriculum, but you can put this in praxis. So when you're citing sources, cite more people of color, cite more women of color, look more to the global south for your literature, look more towards, you know, other disciplines for your literature. Don't just constrain yourself just because you've been taught, let's say, Bentham in your class. Doesn't mean you have to replicate everything that Bentham was saying. I'm sure there are other thinkers who said the same thing Bentham said. So there are other ways of, you know, moving the knowledge along and the practice along without depending on formalized structures.
Lisa, have you got anything to add before you hand over to? Go on then.
Can I just ask Suhraiya, what was the because obviously we had the initial introduction to decolonizing the curriculum before we started this. I just wanted to ask, how did that like initial meeting take place? How did that come about?
Well, I said that, you know, it's launched from the module that I teach, law, race, religion, and law, which I've been teaching here for about 5-6 years. And actually, I don't know if Deborah was here, but I was at one of her workshops, and she was inspirational in thinking about different forms of assessment. So, you know, I'm a researcher drawing on critical race theory and decolonial theory, but that's not enough. It's also about the pedagogy in the classroom, and thinking about things like assessment. So my students here will know that I trusted them with a camera, even though the office would say, oh, a black boy came, got a camera, and it hasn't returned. But because they trust me, you know, so it's about sort of getting that power incrementally and giving it to the students, and having that relationality, that trust, and you know, it is a practice. It's taken a long time, and when we had Remi, she said, same thing about her modules. Yeah, it took her 5 years to get to a point where she felt like actually it was at a point where she was doing something that she really wanted to do with it, and students have been part of that, right? Students have told me year on year, we like this road, we don't like that. And, you know, they said to me, as you know, you're very strict, Suhraiya, and you know, so. But that's all part of it. It's all part of who you are, what works with which student. I don't have a fear of telling any guy that comes into my classroom who's of colour, whatever term you want to use it, you need to pull your socks up and work. But I know that white teachers, white colleagues will not be able to relate. And so I use that. It's as Anthony says, you know how to communicate, you know how to read what issues are, you know when it's about a mental health issue or a background issue or, you know, whatever it is. It's not just behaviour, which is how the university automatically will see everything. It's either a discipline issue or a welfare issue. But actually, as Suhaiymah has repeatedly said in her amazing spoken word, we are human beings, and it's about remembering ourselves as human beings interacting with other human beings.
I don't know if we will get the opportunity, but I'm sure I speak for everyone from Decolonise, the University of Kent, when we say thank you, Suhraiya. There's something really powerful to be said about being able to express yourself freely and unapologetically to someone who is in a position of power. And she won't say she is, but she really is. Being under her guidance has been such a powerful experience for me internally, because I just feel so unconstrained, you know? And it's not everywhere where you feel that. And having lived here in the UK since 2009, it's not very often that I felt that. It's in moments that I felt that, but since the very first day where I said, I want to be in, I have, it's been amazing. It's been amazing. And thank you so very much for allowing us to express our thoughts, to put it into action and to have it in this room. And to exhibit it to people, and thank you.
You haven't spoken at all, have you?
Yeah.
I want to talk about questions. That stuff. Okay. Oh, wait. So we'll come back. Oh,
There's
wait.
still food, by the way.
Oh, okay. No, I'm just trying to figure out how much. 5 minutes. Okay, do you guys want to quickly, and then we can wrap it up?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just wanted to go kind of back to the point about the curriculum and being able to critically think about it and then add in your own sources or teachers put it through their curriculum. One of my modules was, one of the modules I'm doing is Women in Crime, and I think there holds certain significance in actually being able to include Black authors. So in the essay, you basically need to include different feminist perspectives. And obviously you had the radical perspective, non-radical. And then I thought, oh, this is actually an essay where I can actually include a Black feminist perspective. And I almost hesitated. I was like, oh, should I really include it? And then I remembered uni, they encourage critical thinking. Through our curriculums, they tell us to critically think. As well as the teachers included in the curriculum, us ourselves can be the producers of knowledge, and it was quite refreshing and in some respects quite empowering. I don't know whether it's because I've done this project, but it made me, I thought, no, let me put it inside and let me share a perspective that is often ignored. Yes, so I just wanted that.
I'm backtracking a bit, so sorry, but just to go back to your question, Jason. I think the answer lies within empowering students, just to make sure that we are ambassadors to champion this project. And I think the way that you do that is going to sound weird, but you have to piss them off. So get them riled up. So the way I did it was I spoke to a boy who gets similar grades to me. Always go back to Suhaiymah, I'm sorry, but I hate this gap. So what I said to him is, these white people are telling you that you're inferior and that you're not good enough and you don't get great grades. How does that make you feel? And he got pissed off. He was like, wait, what? And he had no idea about the Suhaiymah gap before I told him about it. And now he helped me with the focus group project. And that's how you do it. You just have to make sure that you empower these students to want to make a change and want to make a difference.
As Azeezat said, is there anything we can do? But I feel like we could be doing more. So, for example, this should be a roadshow, in my opinion. You should be going around universities across the UK doing this, because there's a lot of people that can learn from you, and it's either way you should be getting paid to do it.
Yeah.
Like, this is more powerful than any academic I've seen speak. And I'm talking like people who could consider the top academics. You lot are doing the work. You know, there's been a lot of that term, doing the work. You know, shooting bullets from behind the paper. It's not the same as being out there and doing it. I think that's why I have so much respect for people like Remi, you know, especially Remi, who bridges the gap between activism and academia.
Yep.
And I feel like you lot are doing that. You know, and I feel like he is one of few who can truly lay claim to that.
Yeah.
And I feel like after today, I can literally say this group of people here can all lay that same claim as well.
Thank you.
Can I answer that? Be our Suhraiya, be our Dave, be our Sheree.
We're gonna finish it off now. So I'm gonna bring together a couple of different, like a couple of loose threads that have happened that we've kind of been having. Oh, okay, yeah, like.
Okay, hi. I don't know if any of you know me, but she's the amazing Barbara. Stand up, Barbara. Dr. Barbara Adilumi from Medway. So I'm just going to say to support your brothers and sisters over there because they need this sort of education. We've started with Evangeline doing some great work with the focus groups and talking about the reading lists. I'm doing a little bit of what I can when I teach, incorporating Black feminism, incorporating people like Stuart Hall and you know, putting the pictures up and getting them recognised, but there's so much more that you can do, and you mentioned, Jason, about starting a tour. Please go to Medway. And make some real changes there. And I will support you.
Okay, thank you for that. That was really nice, like addition. And so I'm gonna just try to. Oh no. Okay, yeah. It's not my computer, so it's fine. Okay, so I'm gonna try to pull together a couple of different threads that were kind of mentioned. So one is around this, like again, like just going back to this point around like, you know, black boys being or black men being the most disadvantaged. I don't think anyone's disagreeing that within these kind of systems of white supremacy, black men are disadvantaged, black men are stopped in, you know, like there's no one who would ever disagree with that statement because it's just a fact. We just know it to be true. My main problem is when that then becomes the center of all of our activisms and we forget all of the many other communities of color, all of the many other people of color who are also suffering under systems of inequality. And we see that perpetuate itself in different ways. We see that in the Black Lives Matter movement when we talk about black men being killed, yet we know that trans women of color are like being killed at a much higher rate than any other group. We see that when we're talking about like prison industrial complexes, and we know that like black women and women of color more generally are being incarcerated at increased rates. So all I'm saying is that like we need to think more critically about how we center particular people and particular voices, specifically black male voices, within our imaginations of like freedom, within our imaginations of justice. So that's just a quick Okay. So then you mentioned this point around like, you know, what is it? Because I guess I made a sly comment about how you can hold people responsible for their complicity. And I think that there's a difference that I guess I hold up between like what it means to hold like white people responsible for complicity and willful ignorance, because it is willful ignorance, and what it means to hold like people of color responsible. So there's a particular way in which I think all of us are complicit in perpetuating like oppression, right? We perpetuate oppression against like people from foreign countries. We perpetuate oppression against trans people and non-binary people. We perpetuate oppression in so many different ways. And we need to be able to confront that and be honest about that and then work towards changing that. But with white people, I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that by virtue of not confronting racism at any point in time in your life, you do not know. No matter how much you read, no matter how much you study, you cannot know as much about racism as people who have dealt with it every single day of their lives. That is just a fact. And so once we start from that position, once we start from this understanding that whiteness, like what is actually supporting white supremacy is white innocence, right? The idea that white people are innocent even as they're perpetuating such like horrific like violences, but also forgetting our existence is a type of violence anyway, right? Objectifying our existence is a type of violence as well. So what does it mean for us to think about complicity in that violence that like white people are involved in more generally? And what does it mean to take allyship a little bit more critically and be like, okay, you might be doing the work, but we refuse to be giving you like praise just because you are doing the work. Because all of us are doing the work in so many different ways, and people of color have been doing the work for years. So like, just because you are coming to it now does not mean that you should expect people to be grateful that you are doing the work. That needs to go. That, much like Theresa May, that just needs to go. Okay, so I have 2 more points, and then I will stop. So then the third point that I kind of wanted to mention, just because you were kind of bringing it, and I wanted you to say it, because I'm sure you'll say it better, but there's this kind of point around like academic risk-taking, right? And what does it mean for us to recognize that like, even as academics, like who are trying to like make changes, we are also aware of the fact that we are under specific constraints, right? And we know that our scholarship is not going to be valued in many different ways. And so there are a lot of people who might be involved in it or not involved, but who might like see what you're doing and yet not be able to like participate in particular ways. And I guess it kind of comes back to your point that like there needs to be multiple ways of us understanding people doing the work so that it's not just involved in these organizations. It's also providing that emotional support, helping out students in like the structuring who are asking questions about their essays. I think that I've kind of been like, okay, what does it mean to shift my focus away from expecting praise from them and coming back to all of you, you know? And thinking about that as like where I start my practice. And that also kind of connects with the last point that I think everyone's kind of mentioned around like, okay, well, what comes next? Like there's this fear of the network closing, or after this like event that things won't go anywhere, right? And
yeah, it's been great to be here. Me and that genuine, like really amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Today has been a very rewarding but long day, and generally what happens when we deal with these issues, it takes a toll emotionally. So one of the things I'd say to you is to look after yourselves. You know, feel free to speak to each other about this, to offload, find your critical partner and offload, because this is really heavy stuff. But thanks a lot for engaging with the process and sticking with the process. And we look forward to seeing you the next time we host these events. Just to say again, there's a lot of food outside.